River City Council Committee on Finance will now be called to order, Madam Clerk.
Here. 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 Here.
Pelletier.
Here.
Viveras.
Here.
President Fox.
Here. Before I continue, Councilor in seat 2, Councilor Joseph Camara, is not in town. He had another appointment that he had scheduled out of town for work-related matter, and Council Vice President LeBeau did have a commitment earlier this evening, and she is on her way. So I wanted everybody to know that they'll be joining us later in the evening. Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made, whether perceived or unperceived by those present, and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. First item on our agenda today is citizens' input. First person and only person to sign up to speak is Joel Normington, 949 High Street, regarding the special meeting and a request by Councilor in seat 1. 3 minutes.
Good evening, Council. The last time I came here and spoke to you, if you don't remember, was in regards to using vague wording in the city charter to temporarily remove the sitting mayor from office. While I was thankful that this motion didn't pass, I was troubled that a vote even took place in the first place, and even more troubled that the city council president, a direct beneficiary of a successful vote, participated in the vote after expressing his interest to become acting mayor. Here we are, months removed from this unsuccessful action, and we have had an unsuccessful recall election to remove the mayor from office. While the voters were unified in stating that the mayor should be removed from his position, the voters were not unified in who should replace him. While the results are certainly not what many voters had hoped, I am happy that we allowed the democratic process to take place. Now filled with confusion, dismay, and anger, many recall proponents believe that the process is unfair and are calling for changes to the recall process, and that's okay. However, one of our own city council members is asking the city council president to hold a special meeting to override binding election results. This would be an affront to our rights, a blatant act of disregard to the voice of the people, and a troubling attempt to temporarily put democracy on hold. Week in and week out, citizens unhappy with this city council sit silently in your quarters while you deliberate and make decisions that could dramatically impact their day-to-day lives. We respect the rules set forth. We respect the democratic process. And it's now your turn to return that same decency and respect to the voters of the city, even those whom you may disagree with. Respect all voters. Uphold the democratic process. Do not try and change the results of an election when you are not happy with them. Councilor in seat 1, you stated in your letter to the city council president that the actions of a political retaliation exemplify the mayor's inability to govern fairly, justly, and without malice. However, you yourself have also participated in political retaliation, refusing to confirm any appointments made by the current mayor. While the mayor is openly engaged in revenge politics, an action taken to remove an elected official from office is far worse. This type of action would set a dangerous precedent going forward. Let's put this behind us and move forward for the city. Frustrated voters can voice their opinions once again come Election Day in November. In the meantime, do your job. Respect your constituents and their rights, however inconvenient the results of an election may be.
15 seconds.
Explore revising the recall process. Explore ways to add more checks and balances to the mayor's office to prevent revenge politics from happening in the future. The right thing to do, quite often, isn't the easy thing to do.
Thank you. We can please stop. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is transfers and appropriations. Next item, Madam City Administrator.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council.
Good evening.
Within your packet, you did receive a copy of a letter that the superintendent received from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education regarding a current fiscal year 2019 shortfall in required education spending. This was a result of recent enrollment numbers that were received within the charter schools that actually decreased the amount that charter schools would be receiving as part of the fiscal year 2019 distribution. Consequently, the decrease in the amount of funds to be received by the charter schools necessitated that we provide additional funds to the public school system so as to meet the net school spending requirement. So you have before you a request to transfer a total amount of $608,000 approximately, and this will allow us to meet the net school spending for the current fiscal year. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Counselor in seat 7, Counselor Pelletier.
You know, in listening to the school committee last night, they seem that they want to spend $3.4 million that they got, and they don't know how to spend it. And you guys are coming up tonight looking for 608. It doesn't make sense to me. And very shortly, about a month ago, didn't we give them $1 million from our side?
We did, Counselor, and that was a
Where's all this money
function.
going?
And again, it's up to the school committee certainly to make the decision as to how the funds should be spent. But again, we are trying to comply with the requirements of minimum net school spending and provide the department with the resources that they would certainly be entitled to.
Well, again, they talking about spending $3.4 million and how to spend it. So why would you let them take it out of the $3.4 million? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. You know? I mean, I don't know my colleagues' feed, but, you know, they're complaining, well, we're gonna get together, see how we're gonna spend the money. And we're gonna put more.
It's a nice
teachers on.
problem to have, Counselor.
Yeah, no
I'll give you
kidding.
that.
So why come to us for another 600,000? That's the way I feel, so my colleagues can do what they want. I yield.
Thank you, Counselor in seat 6, Counselor Long.
Now, the way I read this, this is to comply with the net school spending, 100%.
Yes, correct.
So we don't really have a say in that. That's just 100% is 100%, right?
Agreed, Counselor. I think that the administration certainly, you know, supports, and I think all councilors support the,
But I thought we
Desire to
did
reach
1.1.
pardon me?
I thought we did 1.1.
Well, part of that, Counselor, was a function of the health insurance numbers, and that was the conversation we had with you when we came in for the last transfer. When we budget going into the fiscal year, we have to estimate certain line items. This is another one, actually. The school department fully anticipated that a certain amount would be distributed to the charter schools, and ultimately that didn't happen because their enrollment numbers were down. For the same reason with the health insurance, we do our best to estimate what the health insurance cost will be. In this particular case, both of these items are net school spending eligible, the monies that get distributed to charter school as well as the money for health insurance. And if the health insurance doesn't meet the budgeted projections, which on the one hand is a nice problem because it means that we're not spending as much on health insurance that we might otherwise be required to spend. But in order to comply with the net school spending requirement, we have to make up the difference in those funds.
So with that in mind, is this going to be the last appropriation you come to us?
I can't be certain, Counselor. I know that there's been some conversation about the health insurance account as well. It's possible that that
have
number
final
may
numbers.
fall short yet again of what was budgeted, in which case we'll be back to the council again. As Mrs. Sahadi had mentioned at the last meeting, we were confident that at least $1 million would be required to add, you know, to adjust for the reduction in the health insurance cost. But it's possible that the number could actually be more. We have approximately 5 more months' worth of health insurance bills for fiscal year 2019. So we're not really certain what those numbers are going to look like by the time we close out the fiscal year, but we are trying our best to level ourselves out at 100% of net school spending. But we may very well be back before you at some point in the future once we get new updated health insurance numbers, looking for yet an additional transfer to the school department.
I yield.
Thank you, Counselor in seat 1, Counselor Kadim.
Thank you. Just for clarification, my counselor in seat 6 had asked just quickly whether or not we were at 101% of net school spending. If I'm wrong, the budget was built on 100% of net school spending, and all the times that the mayor has put forth a budget of 101, it's always been based on the governor's numbers. And the governor's numbers are pretty much dead on arrival, right? Those are the first numbers that we have. So again, that's just misleading the residents of Fall River that we're going to budget 101% of net school spending, because it's never 101 of the numbers that come out of the final budget, or even the House or Senate side. So that's number one. My concern really is that, to Councilor in seat 7's point, and the statement that it's a nice problem to have, right, it's a nice problem to have, but it's a state mandate. It's a minimum requirement of net school spending. So it's not necessarily a nice problem to have when you only have 3 months left to spend these monies. We just made a transfer of $608,000, or we're going to make a transfer of $608,440 to meet the shortfall that we have, that the DESC has identified at the end of the year report. And I guess that comes out of the charter school and the enrollment of students. So I recognize that. The other piece is the $1 million that we just transferred over from the healthcare. And just last night, the school department is estimating, which again, I don't know why the council wouldn't be given these updates, but they're projecting on top of this $1 million, another $1.8 million shortfall on the health side, so healthcare side, which means that we're not meeting our projections, which also means we're going to be $1.8 million below net school spending yet again. So if there is a transfer that's going to come back, hopefully it comes back before the end of the year, and I don't know how they're going to spend that, because then in order to, if we give them this money, they can only spend it on two things: textbooks or prepaid sped tuition. And in order to do prepaid sped tuition, you have to have very specific student names as to who's going to be taking care of having those services, and you can only prepay for the 3 first months of the service. So that's $3.4 million that we're short on the net school spending side. The other concern I have, just watching the school committee meeting, is the $9 million transportation budget that they're talking about. So they've got $9 million. They went out to bid. Those bids are coming in $2.7 million higher than the $9 million that we currently have. That's another problem that we're going to have for next fiscal year. And those numbers are not even eligible for net school spending. So on top of all this and the reduction of revenues, I'm really concerned with where we stand in terms of truly funding and appropriately funding the school system. So that's just my take as counselor in seat 1. I mean, I'm going to be supporting this, but I'd also like to really kind of get some clarification. And I know it's under the purview of the school department. I mean, but do they have a plan to really spend this money down, or are we going to be seeing some of this money fall into a surplus and then having to make it up for the next fiscal year on top of what the net school spending numbers are for FY20? So that's a concern of mine.
Counselor, I'm not familiar with, as you alluded, that the school committee has a definitive plan as to how they're going to spend these funds, and that clearly is within their purview. They can make some repairs if they choose to use the funds for that. They do have the option of prepaying SPED. I do want to go back to something that you stated, though, when I said it was a nice problem to have. I think any time you have a budgetary expense exceeding $20 million and you're able to contain that cost and reduce that expense, it's a good thing, because now those funds are available to go into educational services for the students. Now, I acknowledge, the timing is a challenge and is a problem. We moved ahead immediately upon receiving the letter from DESE regarding the $608,000 shortfall, and that's just the nature of how those numbers are calculated. I don't think that we could have done that any sooner. Clearly, the health insurance is a concern, but again, we still have a number of months left, and we're not totally certain, but we will monitor it. We do have another month's worth of reports that will be out sometime mid-April that'll show actual claims data. We are self-insured, as you know, so we'll certainly do our best to try to make those in a timely manner, but it's, again, I don't think anyone anticipated that the health insurance line item was going to actually see these kinds of savings. I mean, this is a huge reduction in what was budgeted, and I think when it was budgeted, there was a lot of collaboration between the city's financial team and specifically Mrs. Sahadi and also Mr. Almeida on the school side regarding what number they were going to use for health insurance. And everyone seemed comfortable that the number was a solid number. So, but again, we are self-insured and we can't predict that. So we're doing our best to manage that, and hopefully the school committee will have a plan as to how they're going to utilize these funds in a way that benefits the students.
Yeah, and I recognize that. My only concern again is that of this, it's, you know, roughly $3 million just in the healthcare, and I appreciate that the savings coming in there. But again, having the two administrations or two finance groups, departments, talking about what the projections are, and not getting a transfer well into 4 months left in the year is a little concerning from my standpoint, because I think, again, we're not utilizing the funds to, you know, supply the necessary required spending for our students. And we submit, I mean, we submit the end year report in October, so I think at that point, we should have a comfortable, granted it's on budgeted numbers, but we should have somewhat of a comfortable idea as to where we're gonna be with the, you know, net school spending at the end of the year report. My concern really is, not necessarily for this year, but the FY20 budget, right, where we're starting to see the loss in the revenues and having to make this up. And I know they've gotten some significant increase in bumps from Chapter 70, but there's still, that just means that there's going to be additional contributions that are going to be required by the city that we're going to have to make up. So that's just
Well, I
my
would like
statement.
to just interject, Counselor, because you raised a point that actually might be beneficial to your colleagues. We do submit the enrollment numbers in the fall of the year. I did inquire about that because I couldn't understand why almost 6 months later, we're getting an adjustment. But I guess the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education did the calculation based on enrollments. They do quarterly enrollments, and they actually got updated numbers as of, I think it was December 28th. So they used those numbers to recalculate what they did, and then certainly expended the effort to try to educate the local community that additional dollars were needed. So it was not based on the fall enrollment, but rather on an updated enrollment that wasn't issued until late December, and then recalculated from there.
I yield, Mr. President.
Thank you. Anything further from the council? Hearing none. Next item on our agenda is a discussion with Corporation Counsel, City of Police, Chief of Police, and the administration regarding the possibility of limiting the number of licenses for medical and recreational marijuana dispensaries. It was adopted on 2/5/2019. Attorney Macy, Chief Dupere.
Look at this.
Counselor in seat 7, Counselor Pelletier.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all you guys coming up tonight, and I appreciate it. You know, I'm concerned to make sure that our city of Fall River doesn't end up with you call it pot shop, you call it marijuana places, in many locations throughout the city of Fall River. I know there's guidelines that we have to go by, and I'll ask you a few questions. Mr. Macy, you stated to me maybe, I don't know, 6, 7 weeks ago that we could do 20% of the alcohol, but it is 20% of the package stores, the carryouts, that is 20%. And I believe we got 21 licenses for package stores, and we got 17 licensed for beer and wine, and there's 2 more available. But if you were to divide that, you would end up with 8 places for marijuana. Now, what is the current number that the mayor has signed a letter of non-opposition?
Let me back up a little bit. The 20% number is in the law, but it only applies if the voters in the town or the city vote to approve such a restriction in a citywide vote. So that restriction exists in the law if it's adopted by the voters, which it hasn't been yet. And you're right about the number. As far as, the 20% would be 8. As of today, the city of Fall River has issued 11 letters of non-opposition. Of those, I got the statistics here, 3 have been approved for medical, approved to sell on the medical end as a registered marijuana dispensary out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 that applied, and 3 have been approved by the Cannabis Control Commission to cultivate and sell. And those 3 would be Northeast, Hope Heal Health. Well, Hope Heal Health indicates they've been approved. The last information we were able to get from the website was that he had submitted an application. Zaphias also, to my understanding, had been approved, but according to the Cannabis Control Commission, they've submitted an application, and Greener Leaf as well. One of the problems in keeping track of this is that when the Department of Public Health did it, they had a very easy-to-follow website where you just dialed them up, and they told you exactly where the process was. Submitted an application, requested more information, invited to submit, proposed, PCR issued, FCR issued, and approval to sell. So it was pretty easy to know what was going on. The Cannabis Control Commission, this is what you get, and it's very difficult to follow. I think one of the reasons it's difficult to follow is that some weeks ago, maybe the last time I spoke to the council, there were 193 applications pending at the Cannabis Control Commission. When I checked the next week, there were 209. So while they do a very thorough job, it's slow going. So while we on the local end have approved 11, the state has really only approved 3, and of those, I'm only clear that they've approved 2. So in terms of the discussion tonight, it's possible to limit the numbers by going to a vote. Whether or not, as a policy, we should do that, I think might require even more discussion with the council. I'm prepared to engage in whatever discussion you want tonight, and I don't know if you need any more information than I've just given you. I will tell you that I spoke to Mrs. Curran last week, and the Board of Health has been presented, or was presented, with some regulations that was suggested they adopt by, I can't remember the name of the organization, one of the, kind of like the Mass Municipal Organizations, but they deal with the Board of Health. And it was submitted to me, and there were some things in it that I didn't like. I spoke to the woman, the attorney that prepared it, and she said, well, don't worry about those. We're going to submit some new ones, which I think came in either late last week or this week. I'm going to sit down with the Board of Health officer, Ms. Curran, speak to her about those. And these look much better, and they would regulate the premises, perhaps the hours of sale, the cleanliness, give us an enforcement authority that we probably have now, but would codify it in the regulation. I think one of the problems, at least analyzing this, is that although the law was passed in 2014, and people started to apply in 2015, it's just now kind of coming to the fore where where people are actually getting their permissions. And it was interesting, I didn't go, but it was provided to me. There was a seminar held by the Mass Municipal Association at their annual conference on municipal best practices, and that was on January 18th, 2019. So this has been around for a long, long time, but it seems like communities are just beginning to catch up with regulating it, restricting it or not. My understanding, and I think it's more appropriate for the chief to speak to this if you want him to, my understanding is that at least on a public safety basis, these areas or these establishments don't cause a whole lot of problems because they have so much security of their own. So, you know, they keep the customers moving. It's all cash, so of course they try to be secure about that. Some places, I'm not sure in Fall River, the chief can please speak to that. They've had some traffic problems. I know in Northampton they did. I don't know about Haverhill. So that's essentially where we are. I'd be glad to answer any questions that I didn't touch on, and certainly it might lend itself to a meeting of an appropriate committee where we can discuss this in more depth. But I went through what I have tonight, what I have in my files, so that I could address at least a discussion tonight, which is what's on, and I'll do the best I can with the rest of it if you have specific questions.
Mr. Macy, you got recreational marijuana, and then you got medical, and then you got people who grow.
Right,
So that's three different ones.
right.
So now, if you hold, you can go in and buy recreational just with an ID.
Yes,
Got to be 21.
yes.
So what stops anybody to go in without a medical ID into a medical marijuana place and say, I want to buy marijuana here?
Well, I think that's one of the problems that occurred, and I don't know how it occurred. I've spoken to people in the industry, but I think the anticipation, and I'm just speaking not off the top of my head, but I'm giving you my opinion based on somebody who's talked to a lot of people in the industry. I don't claim to be an expert. I think the anticipation in Massachusetts was when they passed the medical marijuana permission law, that medical marijuana would be permitted, it would be regulated, and it would be a reasonable or considerable period of time to see how it shook out. And people I'm talking to said they really anticipated 5 years. So the anticipation was, okay, we'll have medical marijuana, nobody can get it without a prescription, nobody can get it without a special ID, and as this thing gels and we see what the problems are, we'll maybe move to recreational. Well, that didn't happen in accordance with the schedule that I'm told was anticipated. Recreational marijuana was approved in 2 or 3 years. So now what you've got is a piggyback situation where I'm really not sure how many people even want, when I say people, it's corporations or companies want medical marijuana because it's kind of the reverse of what you say. Why would anybody go through all the problems to get a medical ID and a prescription when all they have to do is wait for the store down the street or in the next community to open, and they get one by being 21 with a driver's license?
Well, that's what I had figured. So now they go into medical and get anything they want, even without a prescription.
No. The medical is still the medical. If all you have is a medical license
Yeah.
to sell, you still have to comply with the medical restrictions. If
So
you
they can
have,
only sell medical, that's it?
the medical people can only sell medical. If you have a medical and a recreational, you can sell both. If you have only a recreational, which most people seem to try to get both, you can sell recreational. The recreational is the one that you can buy if you're 21 and you go to an approved store and you have your ID.
All right, to the chief, it's probably a tough question for you. How do you feel as a safety officer here in the city of Fall River, knowing that we possibly can put 8 shops here in the city because of the liquor stores, it's 20%, comes out to 8. And here we go now, we have 11
Just
letters of...
point of information.
See, one, your point of information?
That's only if we adopt a limit.
Yeah, I was just gonna
There's no limit
interject,
on
Mr.
how many.
Kadim.
I just want to clarify for
No.
Council in seat 7 that it's
I think you did that last time, but you're right.
Yeah.
The only way to limit it to 20 or less is to go before the voters and have them vote on it. Right now, it's essentially unlimited in the city of Fall River.
Well, let me just say this, you know, we have the pawn shops, we went to the ordinance committee and said, look, we got 5 and that's it, And if it's, you know, I don't see any difference in sending it to ordinance and say, listen, the city of Fall River has decided that we're only gonna have 8 or 10 or 12. But you're telling me, is that a state law that you have to have
Yes,
people of Fall River vote on it?
yes.
So that's a mute thing, send it to ordinance then. I just think it's out of whack, but if the chief would like to answer, do you feel more is better, or is it, you know?
I'm not as concerned about the number as the locations. So our biggest concerns right now are traffic and the security. So the number, as the judge said, and I think we would all agree, just like a package store, the number is up to the people or up to the ordinance or however it's done, depending on what the item is, and we'll deal with that. We'll do the best, you know, to deal with it. We'll I assume that there would be enforcement if there was a problem. We'll do traffic enforcement if needed. We'll do traffic direction and control. We've been very fortunate with the existing store up on
Tiverton line?
on the line. We haven't had the issues. They hired details that were very cooperative, and they just didn't have the traffic they thought they would have. They didn't have the congestion, so they're not even hiring details anymore for traffic. It's been going very smoothly there. So I don't foresee major problems with the number. As I said, I mean, obviously we don't want 150 of them all over the city, but it's more going to be the locations that are selected and what the traffic flow is like, the streets that they're on. I think that's going to be our concern.
So Kathy, what's the intention of the mayor? Does he want to send it to the voters? I mean, he's already, Mr. Macy says he's got 11 already signed up. Whether or not they're going to get it, who knows?
Well, let me,
Is it,
Go ahead.
Kathy, or you want to answer it?
Well, I'll just add to actually what Corporation Counsel has stated, Counselor, is based on the law as we know it, because the voters of the city of Fall River, when the original question was posed to them, voted in fairly large majority to approve the sale of recreational marijuana. We are required to allow no less than 8, but as he's indicated, the number could go beyond that. So if you decide that you wanted to go below 8, you need a vote from the citywide voters. If you decide to do more than that, then you have the flexibility to do that. I think the important thing here is that even though letters of non-opposition have been issued, it doesn't mean that the state is going to go ahead and authorize the licenses that correspond with that. So I don't know that we're going to know for a significant amount of time how many of those actually move forward, because the process, as the judge mentioned, is a very slow process. I mean, given the fact they started this some time ago and we're only at maybe 3, it's a very long, tedious process. And I believe the number of applications now pending for the recreational, maybe over 200.
well, it was 209 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it seems to increase, not geometrically, but it increases by quite a bit every week.
So you're saying if it's more than 8 would have to go to the voters?
If it's less than 8, you
Less
have to
than
go
8.
to the vote. If it's more than 8, then it's virtually unlimited, as we referenced
Right
earlier.
right now, it is unlimited.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to, I'm trying to bring a number. That's what I'm saying. You're saying we have to go to the voters if it's less than 8.
Correct.
But so why can't we just put an ordinance that we stop it at 8? I don't understand that. We don't have to go to the voters for that.
Well,
Yeah,
It's-
the judges, yeah.
it's a convoluted law, and what I was trying to do is simply paraphrase it, but so you'll know what we're dealing with, I'll read it to you as soon as I find it.
Nah, you don't have to bother. I just want to make sure that the numbers don't climb up there to 15 or 20. That's the whole thing. I mean, you can buy it in Fall River. You don't need 10 or 20 places. You go and buy it. It's up to Flint or South End or whatever the case may be. Then again, the more you have in Fall River, and they have to lose their business and lose it all. If you got 8 people that are doing it, they do a good job, so be it. If you put 15, then again, they may go here, they may go there. Just don't make any sense to me. Trying to keep the businesses all together and doing business, the more you got, the worse it is, as far as I'm concerned. So that's what I feel. And then, Kathy, the State Ethics Commission, did you take that test?
The ethics, yes, Counselor.
You took it?
I did.
Macy, you take it?
State ethics test?
Yeah.
Yeah, it comes on the computer.
Yeah.
If you give the wrong answer, it tells you the right answer, and just keep going until you get it right, but, yeah, I passed.
Even I
It's a
passed.
no-fail system, that's right.
I had trouble with the little button, I broke it twice.
Oh,
But that's besides the point, because my fingers don't go that fast. But the whole thing about this, that some of the places that is trying to establish a business there, and they're gonna give 3% to the town or to the cities, and some would even as far saying, listen, we're coming in, we're gonna try to help you. We'll give you a little bit of the 3% right now to help out the town or the city, whatever the case may be. And then when it actually happens, then you make up the difference. But how can the mayor of the city of Fall River violate the law, as far as I'm concerned? How can he pick up $52,000 from the marijuana people? I mean, it just don't make any sense to me. It's a violation. It's definitely a violation. And nobody said nothing. This is, well, he's got it, he can do what he wants. Now, you can have more companies coming in. Is the same thing gonna happen? How does he get that money? What is it? Look.
Well,
I'll sign
Counselor,
that at
I
10.
can't speak
Will I sign the
to
at 10?
how,
And 2 days
or-
later,
or
3
why.
days later, he gets a check for 20,000, 15,000? That's crazy.
well, I can only
If I
tell you
took a-
that
if I
it's
took a-
regulated,
If I took a
and it was
$50
reported.
Go
Let
ahead.
the counselor finish, Attorney Macy. Counselor?
You're not supposed to take a $50 thing to go to a restaurant because you've done the guy a favor. Here you are signing the thing, 3 days later, you got a check for 15 or 20 grand. Doesn't make any sense to me. Does any other cities or town get that? I don't think so. So, I don't know. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's smart, and I think it's the wrong thing to do. But, again, is it legal?
Counselor,
legal?
all I can tell you is, as far as I know, it's legal. Nobody has brought any complaints. The contributions that I'm aware of, which I'm aware of because I read about, were all contributions that were reported either to the Campaign Finance Committee or to somebody else. They were publicly reported. The agencies that monitor that didn't take any action or any offense, and it has nothing to do with the city itself as far as the operation of what we do on a daily basis.
Well, I think it's a violation of state and the commission law as far as I'm concerned. But I'll tell you what, I had closed my account because I wasn't running. I had $35 left in the account. I made it out, St. Joseph Church, North Main Street, blah, blah, and put it in a basket. 3 weeks later, I get a letter from the Ethics Commission. Hey, what are you doing? You gave $35 out, what's it for? I said, I gave it to the church. I closed my account. I gotta listen to that, and we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars that's going in to that other fund. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't think they pick it on me, but it doesn't make any sense. So the priests end up keeping the money, and they got a call. I got a letter, he got a letter, and it's all squared away for a lousy $35.
You're going to heaven now.
I'll probably go to heaven, who knows? But anyway, that's my frustration, and I want to make sure that the city is not overrun with these marijuana shops. That's the whole thing. So I don't know when he's going to stop, if he's going to keep going. I still think we could do something with ordinance and cap it at a certain thing. So if there's something my colleagues think they can help me out to do this, so be it. I'll listen to whatever you got to say. With that, thank you, and thank you. Always a pleasure.
Counselor in seat 4, Counselor Kilby.
Just one or two questions. So, Council Mason, the 209 applicants, 209, is that Fall River or statewide?
No, that's statewide.
Oh.
No, excuse me, I really misspoke if I didn't make that clear. Why I said that is because as the backlog grows, it's not likely that well, maybe it is, I can't speak for the commission, but the way the approvals are coming in, they're coming in dribs and drabs. The people in this city, the 3 that have been approved, were filed in 2015, 2016. So the idea, which I can accept as being something we should be concerned about, that we can be inundated, is probably prevented by the logjam up there. I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, I think I knew the answer to your question in terms of 209, but that's their problem, basically. They have to deal with the amount of volume they're getting.
Yeah, it is.
Our problem is what we get here and how we're going to regulate it here. So you stated that we have to go to the voters to limit, anything
Yeah, well,
over 8.
let me see if I can paraphrase it.
One second, Your Honor. So what's the purpose of the letter of non-opposition then, when we have to go to the voters?
Well, we have to go to the voters if we want to limit the number. Because we are a community where the voters originally voted to approve the sale of marijuana, we can't unilaterally restrict it. If we want to restrict it, we have to go to the voters, and they have to adopt the restriction.
Can I just appoint?
Hypothetically,
Point of information, Counselor Seawan.
Just for clarification, I just want to make sure that the council understands there are two specific licenses. So the marijuana licenses require a letter of non-opposition. The recreational require a host agreement, and those are the licenses with the grow facilities that are regulated to be not less than 20% of your off-premise liquor licenses. So medical marijuana, there's no limit on the number. You just have to have a letter of non-opposition, which is approved by the administration.
okay, thank you.
So, well, I think as we continue this discussion, which I think is fruitful, you can see, we really get into the weeds. One person needs a letter of non-opposition, but not a host community agreement. One person needs a host community agreement. What we have done with the people we've approved is both. We have not given anybody a letter of non-opposition without a host community agreement, and vice versa. So everybody that's been approved has both, even though they don't necessarily, the Control Commission doesn't necessarily require it.
Okay. So within the city of Fall River, how many requests for letters of non-opposition were asked upon, and how many did the mayor approve Did he just
Well,
blanketly approve all of them? or-
the approval is easy. He's approved 11 entities. Now, some of them wanted both medical and recreational, so those are two different letters. I don't keep track of everybody that asks for a letter, but I will tell you, they kind of separate themselves out into three categories. One category is people that call a city department and they're referred to the law department. They eventually get to me, and the questions usually are, how do I apply for a marijuana license? What do I got to do to get a marijuana license? Where can I have a marijuana license? And generally, those people essentially don't know what they're doing, and they're just looking for information. So I tell them, look, what you have to do is send in a letter telling us what you want to do. It's all regulated by the Cannabis Control Commission. They have a website. They'll tell you what you need to include. And I would say most of those calls don't generate anything. They just, and there's lots and lots of them. I don't keep track of them. The next category are people who are a little more serious and actually do send in a letter. Some of the letters are never followed up. I'm aware of at least 3 that were followed up and were not granted. One was for location, one was because of the individuals involved. Let's just put it this way, they didn't interview well, and the other one was early in the game, so I can't remember why. And then there are others that just don't apply, withdraw their applications, and don't follow up. So there are there are many, many more who have made inquiries than have been granted the letter.
Well, I guess my point is I'm glad to see that there was some type of screening being performed, and it wasn't just an application, okay,
Yes, there is a type of screening that goes
maybe I'm
on.
not being specific with the question, but if 11 were presented and crossed the mayor's desk and he signed all 11.
No, I can guarantee you,
Any protocol and
it's
any
not anywhere
screening
close to
going on.
100% of the applications. And why I broke it down into 3 categories is because I don't consider the phone inquiries, even though sometimes they call back 2 or 3 times, as applications. That those are people who claim to be interested, but never really follow up.
Thank you. Well, I'll end with, I totally agree, or I can recognize Councilor Pelletier's concerns, especially with the donations and things like that. But I see that this is going to be a major topic for this council moving forward, and this resolution is just the beginning. I'm sure there's going to be, it's going to be thoroughly vetted at Health and Human Services or ordinance, because I think a lot of us are confused. Maybe even yourself, Your Honor, I don't want to insult you, but it is convoluted, as you said, and it's.
Well, that's the problem. I don't think I'm confused, but it is convoluted.
But
And
usually
trying to
your
explain it
answers are-
isn't very easy. I will say this, and I think it would be productive. When I get the notice from Ms. Curran that the Board of Health meeting is going to be held, when the attorney from, I don't know, the organization comes down, I'll let the council know. If the council wants to attend, fine. If not, we'll send you the minutes of that meeting, so that at least we'll be abreast.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one other thing, Councilor Joseph Kamara, not here today, but times have changed, like he stated, I think, a couple of meetings ago. I remember my last tenure in the council, we're trying to regulate lazy cakes, and just a number of years subsequent to that, here we are, dealing with this issue. So, and I can imagine the challenges it is for the Florida Police Department. I know driving around the city, I used to smell flowers and Syrian, Sam's meat pies, and now, I'm smelling marijuana, I think, more than anything else. So it is a challenge.
Are you a Jimmy Buffett fan?
Yes.
And then he's got a song that was so long ago, only
Yeah.
jazz musicians were smoking marijuana.
I yield. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. In seat 1, Counselor Kadim.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through you, I know Counselor in seat 7 has some heart problems. I don't want to add to it, but I do just want to you know,
Get the AED.
I do just want to caution him, if he's concerned about the $52,000 that was donated to the campaign fund, I would urge him not to go on to the legal defense fund. It's a lot higher than the 52,000, and we won't talk about all those other funds that haven't been reported to the other agencies. So with that, and just in terms of the February 4th, 2019 memo that we had, or that came from your office to Pam, you had only listed 10 companies. Is that, and I know we're a company off, but is there a new company that came in since then, or is it just a typo?
I think I know the one you're talking about, Counselor. Was that the one that listed the 10?
Yeah.
The newest one is, no, I got a new one. I had it updated today. The newest one is Aura Cannabis Company LLC. That brings it to 11.
Okay. And are they looking for medical and recreational, just recreational or medical?
I think they want both, and I'm not sure about cultivation. I
Okay.
only have it in 2 columns.
Did they get a letter of non-opposition
They did.
and a host agreement?
They did.
Okay. And just in terms of, with Councilor in seat 7's concerns, in terms of going to the ballot, can we just double check that? My understanding is that if we're at the 20%, so if we don't go below the 20%, I think if we want to go below the 20% of your off-premise license, that's what would require the actual ballot question. I think if you're at the 20%, I think you can have an ordinance.
Let me read the summary so that, because if I read, if you've seen the law, I believe,
I have,
it's just
And the only reason I ask that is because
But
there are 2 that would require us to, especially in towns, for us to go through the town meeting and a vote, and then also we could do it by general bylaws, which is similar to an ordinance.
Let me just read what I have that is the summary. The idea behind Section 3A2 is that if the voters in a city voted in favor of legalization in 2016, and I didn't write this, so don't take umbrage to the language. Its elected officials should not be able to thwart the will of the voters by unilaterally prohibiting retail sales, limiting the number of retail outlets to less than 20% of local liquor stores, or limiting the number of retailers to less than the number of medical marijuana dispensaries, unless the city held another citywide vote by which the voters approved such a restriction. Since our voters voted in favor of the legislation, we fall within the provision whereby we can't prohibit or limit retail outlets to less than 20% of liquor stores, or limit the number of retail outlets to less than the number of medical dispensaries as it stands now. However, there is nothing in the law now which purports to stop the city from allowing more than 20% of the number of liquor stores. If we want to do that, then we submit under 3A2 any bylaw or ordinance for approval to the voters pursuant to the procedure in subsection E. So you have to submit it to the voters.
So just to kind of piggyback on Councilor in seat 4's line of questioning. So I know there's obviously the letter of non-opposition, which kind of creates a loophole in terms of the state law for allowing medical marijuana. If you don't receive this letter of non-opposition, then you can't apply for the license.
That's right.
It's essentially a prerequisite to get the license. So a community can, for all intents and purposes, hold up and not have any medical marijuana facilities within the community.
Technically, you're right. Now, there was, and I don't remember now if we gave him one or not, there was somebody who told me, one of their lawyers, that, well, if we don't get it, it would be arbitrary and capricious. And I said, well, look, good for you. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. But you're correct. There could be, whatever you want to call it, a moratorium, a slowdown, simply, a voluntary cessation of issuing letters.
But my concern is more on the recreational facilities themselves. So with the statute that came out and that was passed by the voters of Massachusetts, it essentially says that you have to have a host agreement in place. So part of the language doesn't allow you to limit or preclude a company coming in as long as you have a host agreement in place. That being said, Councilor C4 kind of alluded to the questioning as, is there any type of oversight? Are we looking at some prerequisites? Are there established evaluation criteria for all the companies so that all the companies are being
We don't,
evaluated at
I
the same?
think what you're asking me is if we have a protocol or a checklist. No, we don't.
Okay. Can we, and the only reason I'm concerned about that is if you deny somebody, if we don't have that established, whether it's through the administration, solely through the administration, or a joint evaluation criteria by the city council and the administration, I think that kind of opens it up to some litigation if we start denying people because of the way they presented or things of that nature. The other concern I have is really just in terms of the quality of life. And I know the chief talked about not really necessarily concerned about the various areas, the number of facilities that we have, but where they're located. And since we missed the boat in putting in a district, a specific overlay district for these recreational and medical marijuanas, they really have the ability to go anywhere in the community. Obviously, the setback from schools, I mean.
Well, they have ability
Yeah.
to go anywhere where they're permitted by zoning.
Right.
So local business, retail.
Yep. So in terms of that, though, the concern that I have as just one counselor is obviously, and this is where we get to the impact fees for the host agreements, it's really just, we know it's a cash business, right? We know the deliveries are going to be coming back and forth. We have traffic issues, we've got potential security issues, and I know a lot of these companies are required to have security in detail. Again, I mean, it's private security. It's not police details of police security that are at these various facilities. The other issue is we talk about, and I know regulations has talked about the odor from some of our auto body shops. Some of the complaints that we've gotten from some of these facilities, especially if there's a grow facility, is just the amount of odor that's coming from these establishments. So, I for one have some issues and concerns about making sure that we're regulating some of these areas. I know the health department has some regulations, but unfortunately, unlike the liquor licenses, once they get this host agreement and they've got their license, we really don't have, and I say we as a city, really don't have any real oversight on their license. It's really at the state level.
Well, I'm not sure that's true in this respect. Most of these companies have elaborate security arrangements and reporting arrangements that they basically sometimes file with us, but always file with the Cannabis Control Commission. The regulations that I've read, the revised regulations that are going to be discussed by the Health Board, would have some teeth in terms of regulating what goes on both inside and outside these shops, both in terms of cleanliness, supervision. And our host community agreement says, what I think most of them say, you will abide by all local rules and regulations, so that although the host community agreement doesn't say you will do this, you won't do that, if the Board of Health adopted regulations that were reasonable, they'd have to comply with them.
No, I recognize that, and I'm not concerned about the Board of Health because the Board of Health is going to oversee the cleanliness of the facility, especially if they have edibles, the kitchen facility, where the plants are probably stored. But in terms of where we have renewal licenses for liquor licenses, right, we could potentially have the licensing board say that we're not going to reissue a license to a business because they either violated sold to minors one too many times, or they become what we've determined a nuisance property with the number of calls. So outside of the host agreement, I mean, if there's a violation of the host agreement, I guess the only real recourse would be to go to court and just file, obviously, a complaint that the agreement hasn't been followed. So I guess that's just my concern in terms of all of these licenses moving forward. And it's not just an issue with Fall River. I mean, this is
Well, I
an
think
issue
we can
throughout the
adopt,
state.
or they will adopt reasonable regulations. Our host of agreements are reviewable every 3 years. And I think, and I know at least I get the impression, you follow this pretty closely. I think that, at least on the state level, it's kind of a work in progress. At least as I read the law, I don't know if there's an entity called the marijuana industry, but it looks to me like the law was phrased and passed by the marijuana industry. And it also looks to me like as we get down, we meaning the communities that have these facilities, as we get down the road, the Mass Municipal Association or other cities and towns may turn around and say, oh, no, you can't do that. In fact, I think, they didn't send me the case, but there's a case, I think, in Salem challenging either denial of a license or the granting. I don't know which, and I guess whoever was supposed to send it to me didn't, because I don't have it.
So I guess my question is, and I know we've got, again, the Board of Health oversight, that's obviously very limited in their scope, what they can oversee. But again, it's a state oversight versus a local oversight. So that's, once we sign these agreements, I mean, outside of some real significant problems that, it's outside of our hands, and we have to rely on the state for those, that oversight for them to come down. And I know they've got annual inspections that come down, and I recognize that piece. The other piece that I just really want to talk about is that if we're not, or I guess I'll ask the question, is there any plan to come back before the city council, as Councilor in seat 7 has suggested, and create an ordinance and get that ordinance submitted to, if it's a requirement, to get it on the ballot, putting a limit on the number of licenses that we're going to issue?
There are no plans that I'm aware of. There certainly is nothing to prevent this council, now that they know it can be a ballot question, from doing that. There's also nothing, what I was going to add, as we can see, this discussion, which is helpful, is kind of far-ranging. It's a much broader topic than I think we thought it was. It's certainly possible, likely, to refer it to appropriate committee or create an appropriate committee. Because as you know, or I think we all know, when the Board of Health issues regulations, they're regulations. They can also be embodied in an ordinance. There is nothing that I've found in the law that says communities cannot regulate the functioning of these marijuana establishments.
So I guess I'm really trying to find what the strategic plan is for the city based on recreational marijuana facilities.
Well, I think it's to take it on a ad hominem or ad hoc basis and continue along the lines we've been doing, which is, I think, 11 may sound like a lot, but 11 since 2015 really isn't. And with input from the council, the Board of Health, certainly if it becomes a problem, the chief could raise it. If it's a fire issue, the fire chief could raise it. I mean, nothing that we've done prevents us from regulating. The only thing that's a preventive is the limitation unless we, as a city, decide to put it on the ballot.
And I recognize that, but I mean, and I know we've only gotten 11. I mean, we're early on with obviously with the state just coming through with their regulations. So I mean, we had a moratorium for a while. So I mean, we're talking about maybe 6-8 months since close to a year maybe now that the regulations have come out from the Cannabis Commission. So I think you're going to start seeing a lot more individuals getting in, at least in the recreational piece. The grow facilities, that just requires so much upfront money and seed money to get those establishments completed, and the know-how to do that is really limited in terms of the ability to do that for people around here, because obviously we haven't had that expertise. A lot of people are relying on Colorado and California to kind of establish some of these grow facilities, but as they start to pop up, my other concern is the market will correct itself, and what I hate to see, and I think what we're going to see from a national standpoint is that you're going to see marijuana legalized across the country, and once we do that, you're going to start seeing a lot of these pharmaceutical companies jumping into the market, talking about the growth, selling. You got Philip Morris, and that tends to leave a lot of these other smaller businesses.
What I've heard the anticipation is the large tobacco companies will get in, not the pharmaceuticals. But I
Well, on
suppose,
the
look, I
medical-
suppose any billion-dollar company
Yeah.
looking at a billion-dollar industry could get into
Right.
it.
So Philip Morris will be selling it. I mean, that only makes sense. I mean, that's right in their, obviously their wheelhouse. But again, my concern is that we as a city have seen where businesses, when we rely heavily on certain businesses and trying to get some of our business buildings and commercial property developed takes a little bit longer than what would a residential neighborhood, even if you had a foreclosure or things like that, you get a pretty decent turnaround. So that's just my concern about that, and losing tax revenue or seeing a property go dormant for a number of years before it gets redeveloped again. So that's just my concern as one counselor. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Counselor in seat 8. Counselor Viveras.
Thank you. I think we started touching on this, but what exactly does an applicant have to have in place in order to receive a letter of non-opposition and host agreement?
At a minimum, they have to have a location that they've selected that's zoned properly. They have to have a vested interest in that location. They either have to own it or have an extant lease in it. They can't just come in and say, well, you know, if I get the license, I'll go up on the corner of, I'm not going to pick on anybody's corner. They have to have some substantial finances. We don't have a cutoff, but the finances haven't been a problem, mainly because, and I realized this, but I heard it on WSAR, actually, a guy named Jim Borgasani, who supposedly is some sort of an expert in the field, indicated that because it's still federally prohibited, banks, traditional banks, will not lend money to these entities. So they're generally backed by well-heeled venture capitalists. And everybody who has come in and gotten a letter has demonstrated some substantial financial ability.
Yeah, I guess my only concern, and I'm glad, you know, that there is a process in place, and obviously this is a lucrative business. So my concern would be, you know, people looking for licenses and you know, holding them hostage until they get investors in place and things of that nature.
Well, that hasn't happened yet, and we're kind of cautious about that. The other thing that we do have in our host community agreement is that the rights are not assignable. That means they can't sell the agreement. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't take in other partners, or some people could leave that corporation and bring in new people. But I think your fear, which is one of the things we anticipated, frankly, is, okay, I get the license. I'm all set. I'll sell somebody the license for X $100,000, and I'll just take the money and off I'll go, and all I've done is, you know, spent a little money on lawyers or a lot of money on lawyers, got a letter, got an application, and off I went. So that doesn't happen or can't happen.
And the 20% requirement, every city and town have to meet that?
Yeah, that's a state law. That's not peculiar to us. The only guys, I guess the only people that it would not affect is if there's a community in the state, and there are probably some high-end, high-value suburban communities that did vote against the legalization of marijuana. So if those communities, and I think they're fairly few in number, I'm going to assume there are some, but I don't know. They would not be bound. They wouldn't have to go to a vote. They never adopted the recreational marijuana law in the first place.
And I'm not sure if you gave this breakdown earlier or not. Out of it's 11. Is there 11 letters of non-opposition? Is that what's out there now?
Yes.
What's the breakdown between medical, recreation, and grow? You know.
It's difficult to tell because on the Cannabis Control Commission printout, Northeast has been allowed to commence operations for all three. The others still have applications in process. However, on the medical, Canatech, which was one of the first ones, has yet to be approved to sell. But Hope Heal Health, Nature's Medicines, which was originally called Zephyus, I guess they changed their name because nobody could pronounce it, and Northeast Alternatives have all been approved out of 6 original applications. So,
How many of those are open now?
you know, 2 are definitely open, Northeast Alternatives and Zephyus. I keep reading that Hope Heal Health is also open, but it isn't borne out by the information I have, which is somewhat dated. It's not like the stock market where you know within a minute what happens. If Hope Heal Health is open, and I think they said they are, it's for medical only, and they have been approved for medical.
Chief, you had mentioned that the location can't be anywhere near a school. Are there any other restrictions as far as location goes?
Other than near a school?
Yeah.
I think there's a restriction on daycare centers, and there was one location where I got a call from, I don't know if it was the Department of Public Health or the CCC, but it was one commission where the proposed location was near a health center, and they were concerned as to whether children were routinely treated in that center or not, and it turned out they weren't, and I checked with the chief, and it was not a troublesome area at all, so we reported that back to them. So in addition, they're, to give them credit, I mean, I think part of the reason they have a backlog is they're very thorough. They just don't accept our letters and say, okay. So that's the answer.
All right, thank you. I mean, I certainly think as a city, we're being progressive in this area. And I also agree with, Counselor in seat 7, that we should take into consideration putting a cap on how many of these licenses and how many of these dispensaries are open in the city. So with that, I yield.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor in seat 6, Counselor Long.
Oh, most of my questions have been answered, but I'll be brief. We can't really control the licenses, and you tell us that the minimum number we can have is 8 in total. Is that correct?
No, 8 is 20% of the number of licenses we have, because we voted in favor of recreational marijuana. We, as a city, can issue unlimited licenses unless the voters say, no, you can't. It's got to go to a vote.
On the license?
On the number.
Okay, so what I'm saying is we can control this by the non-opposition letter or the agreement for the.
Yes, the host community agreement.
Host community.
Yeah, if we don't issue any permissions, then they don't get off, the people who want the permission don't get off first base.
Oh, so all I'm saying is would it then be wise to keep the council in check here so that we go and have an ordinance saying that we're not going to give any more than 15 host agreements or 15 letters of opposition? We would control it that way.
I think you might run into some legal problems, but I think there is a way to monitor or whatever, however we want to call it. I'd be a little careful, given the letter of the law, as to how we phrase things, because once we draw a curtain, whatever we call it, moratorium, prohibition, then somebody is going to say we violated the law. But on the other hand, a monitoring process, biweekly report, I will say this, that for whatever reason, probably because this council is very interested, at least in my opinion, the council has been kept pretty abreast of what's going on with respect to the marijuana permissions.
Yes,
I think there's an additional consideration too, Counselor. We tend to think of them strictly in terms of the product, but I think if the council were inclined to try to, in some way, put some limitations or restriction, you have to deal with them individually. We'll take the grow facilities only as an example. Now, they're occupying space. We know for a fact that some of our existing license holders have invested millions in their facilities. Canatech has invested a huge amount of money, Hope Hill Health, and the others. And again, if you have a facility that's simply growing the marijuana, we are able to tax them and receive proceeds for everything that leaves their facility and could be getting shipped anywhere outside of the area. So there's also a revenue stream there that, so long as you've got the proper, obviously building controls and you're meeting, the building code standards, and you don't have problems with, the environmental impacts of those facilities. They make large investments, and there is a huge revenue to be gained from it that, again, the marijuana is leaving the area. It's not being sold or dispensed in any way. So if you're considering putting some kind of restrictions on it, I think you almost have to look at them separately to some degree.
I agree.
Because some uses are not as potentially offensive, we'll say, as others. So
I think what's happened here is now that they went with the recreational, I don't think too many people are too concerned about the medical aspects of this, even the grow aspects. I mean, that would be pretty much quiet. You wouldn't even know where they are, for the most part.
Exactly.
But when we start talking about recreational, I think Council in seat 7 brings up we don't want every Cumberland farm selling this stuff. Just because they're a big corporation and they got a bunch of money and say, hey, I got my license, I'm gonna put the lazy cakes out on the front counter again. That's not something we're looking for. So what we're saying is I think we'd be within our rights as long as we didn't violate the 8% or whatever, 20%, eight licenses, and went above that and said, let's control it by, and I think it is under control by the use of the whatever you call it, I don't know.
The host community.
The non-opposition letter.
Or
The
non-opposition.
non-opposition letter and the host
community.
agreement. We can control it through that, and I think that's the way it was intended to be. So I don't think we're that far away from where we want to be. We just want to make sure that this just doesn't get crazy because somebody is trying to take advantage of certain financial situations.
And I think, Counselor, it just may get a little bit more complicated with the fact that you may be okay with an HCA for a grow facility, but not okay with the HCA for recreational, retail. So
Right.
that's
Exactly.
saying it gets, it would have to be refined.
Well, and I think, wouldn't that be a legitimate concern for anybody? I mean, we don't want these things on every corner.
Yeah, I think it is, but I just think before we get way too far ahead of ourselves, 11 since 2015 is about 3 a year, and there are none, to my knowledge, pending. I mean, there's another company that wants to see us. They're the people that had a poor interview the first time. So I think your concerns are legitimate, and we should continue the discussion. But I just don't want to create the impression that we're being inundated with applications or.
Also, the licensing procedures at the state level are pretty complicated and expensive. I mean, you need to have some serious capital to get into this, and most of the time, the original application fee is not even refundable. If you're denied, it's gone. Am I right with that?
I don't think to the state, yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah. I think we got pretty well under control, but I would like to see if we could just explore that a little more from a legal standpoint to say, can we pass an ordinance to say, and try to work those numbers as to whether it's a growth facility, whether it's a medical facility or recreational facility, to try and give us a little bit more control over how many are going to be out there. So with that, I yield.
Thank you. Counselor in seat 3, Counselor Kamara.
Thank you. I would just hope that we all caution ourselves that in an effort to be concerned, that we not try to fix something that's not broken. And I know that in speaking to many people, there's always a sense of the importance of the free market, that capitalism should prevail when all else fails. So I don't think we're going to end up with such a number that it goes beyond the number that's suitable for the market. The people will decide, and the people have already decided, that they want this product. And we all know that there's an illegal market, so that if there's a legal market that the community can basically benefit from, then let's pursue that. And I would ask the city administrator, what is the income the city is receiving now, just with the few, 2 now recreational facilities that are open in the community? What is the amount of money that the city is getting now from these facilities, approximately?
Well, Council, we've just started invoicing. Northeast Alternatives was the first recreational that opened, and they have to report to us what their sales are for us to know the amount that we're going to recover. So they have to provide that sales information. So we have yet to receive anything back from them, and they were the first to open on the recreational side. I believe that we are allowed to collect on 3 of what, well, we were calling them pilots, but they're not pilots now. They're
No, the pilot is the 50,000,
is the 50,000.
which is not a
So-
pilot, but
That's the upfront.
Yeah, we call it
That's
a
the-
pilot, it's not a
that's the
pilot.
fee.
The fee, so we are entitled to those 3 fees, 50,000 each for the ones that are
So
actually
you're
open.
150,000 right there.
Yes, but then I think the larger unknown is the actual excise that would come from the sale of the product, which again, we're still in the beginning stages of that.
But haven't there been some figures that have been put out there just on the Rhode Island Avenue market?
There are, Counselor, and the number that has been suggested, but I want to stress, we haven't seen an invoice, we haven't seen a formal report.
That's all right,
but-
we're being cautious. but
Okay,
just-
very good,
let's
we
be
appreciate
conservative.
that. But the estimate was, I think it was as much as $500,000 in 1 week, Judge?
Right. So I think that as we, and I've been a major advocate for trying to find some relief to the rent payers, to the beleaguered rent payers, to the beleaguered property taxpayers, that this is clearly, and I haven't bought into every source of revenue that your administration, our administration has promoted. I don't like electronic billboards, you know that. I'm happy to see we're down to 1, and I hope that that one gets buried, not buried in the ground so that we see it, buried so that it's no longer an issue, is the one right out here at Government Center. I don't think that those electronic billboards are good things, but it seems to me that the market that allows for recreational, medicinal, as well as grow facilities is a source of revenue that can really provide some relief to the taxpayers in this city. Now, Chief, we have a couple of facilities that have opened. Is it a particularly problematic situation that you have to send cops there regularly to stop people from fighting and domestic violence and that kind of thing?
No, as I was speaking about before, the major concern for us was traffic, and that hasn't even materialized. So they've been very good at keeping things quiet, doing what they're supposed to do. They required to self-report any incidents, and I think we got 1 about an employee who did something inappropriate. But other than that, we've had no issues.
Right. And I think that we know, I think all of us know that more likely the kinds of problems that exist in the community for the police are barroom fights, brawls that happen at the end of the night,
And I know from my own experience, as someone who grew up in the 60s and 70s, 80s, that certainly those who use marijuana were not prone to be causing violence in the community, difficulties in the community. So, let's
Don't look
face
at
it.
me.
Yeah, so I've never been to a Jimmy Buffett concert, but I think clearly, there's a concern that's arisen. It's okay to have that concern, but let's not try to fix something that's not broken. Let the market pursue its course. If there happens to be something down the road that we need to have a stop put to it, then so be it. But here, this has been in process for a few years. We've only got 2 places that are open recreationally. We've only got 11 letters of non-opposition, and that just triggers then the whole process that the state has to go through for citing the facilities. Frankly, we are very much a pedestrian city, so, 11 locations or 8 locations in Fall River is just going to mean that likely they're dispersed throughout the city in every neighborhood. As I recall, these are not being confined to a single neighborhood. I'm glad there wasn't a zone, because a zone would then, I think, be problematic in terms of accessibility to the public that might want to buy. So, I would say the issue has been discussed. Let's not jump to a conclusion that we need to get a vote to try to limit anything. Let the market prevail. Let the economy decide what happens. The places, as I understand, I've never been in one, but I understand they're very clean, they're very well maintained. They're really like going into a boutique more than they're like going into a bar. The product is enclosed in glass, generally, so that you look at it the way you might look at fine jewelry in a jewelry store. You don't have access to touch it and feel it and taste it and whatever else might happen. It's not like going to the ice cream store and say you want a taste of that one, this one, and that one. I don't think they allow that kind of thing. So, so let's, as I say, let's just calm down. Everything's going to be okay, and let's make some money. Let's help the taxpayers get some relief. And this is really the best message so far. The mayor mentioned it tonight. This is the best alternative to tax and rent increases, and I think it's one that we need to just let happen. And with that, Mr. President, I yield.
Thank you. Counselor in seat 1, Counselor Kadim.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think Councilor in seat 3 just revealed his secret for his summer ice cream shopping. He gets samples of everything, so he gets free ice cream. But with that, I just got a question on the
Is that funny?
not funny. Host, I'm not a stand-up comedian. Host agreements, do they have a list of all the officers that are on there, partners, CEO, who the CFO is, the chief security officer?
Do they have them in the host agreement? No. The host agreement runs to the entity, and it's signed by the authorized officer. Most of them are LLCs, some of them are LLPs.
So we would have access to see who those LLCs, the holders are for those LLCs?
We would have access to who they are, yeah.
And we wouldn't necessarily know who would be managing those.
Excuse me?
We wouldn't necessarily know who's managing those facilities, because like, similar to a liquor license, you would
No.
know who the
No, we don't know
manager
who
is.
the on-site manager is, you're right.
So nothing on the CEO outside of the LLCs, but they typically, the LLCs usually have that, right? Or is it just partners that listed on the LLCs?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the process is with the CCC or the DPH, but I'm pretty sure that their on-site team and setup had to be demonstrated, because from time to time, I do get
I guess I'm just trying to
security
figure
and
out how.
operations outline.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how the public can gain access to see exactly of that LLC, who the individuals are that make up the LLC and make up
Well,
that
I mean,
company
the
from a management standpoint.
Articles of incorporation or the articles of formation are public record on the state website.
Right.
As far as the on-site manager, that's a little more of a problem, if it is a problem, because they don't have to list the manager like they do on a liquor license.
Okay. With that, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the council? Motion to adjourn finance has been made by Councilor Kilby, seconded by Councilor Long. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you.
Yeah, right, yeah, long day. Fall River City Council meeting will now be called to order, Madam Clerk.
Councilors Kadim?
Here.
Joseph Kamara? Stephen Kamara?
Here.
Kilby?
Here.
Lalaghy Baloo? Long?
Here.
Pelletier?
Yeah.
Viveras? President Pine?
Here. If everybody in the chamber can please rise for a moment of silent prayer. Thank you, and a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to the open meeting law, any person may make an audio or video recording of this public meeting or may transmit the meeting through any medium. Attendees are therefore advised that such recordings or transmissions are being made whether perceived or unperceived by those present and are deemed acknowledged and permissible. Before I continue, I was misinformed. Council Vice President LeBeau is under the weather, and that is the reason she is not here today. Madam Clerk.
The first item before you is a communication from the mayor and an appropriation order in the amount of $608,440 to be appropriated to the school appropriation from the general fund stabilization fund.
Motion to adopt?
Motion
Second.
to adopt has been made by Councilor Kilby, seconded by Councilor Stephen Kamara. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
We have a communication from the trustees of the Fall River Public Library regarding the emergency funds for roof repair.
It would be appropriate, council, to likely accept and place this on file. There was a financial order that was referred to Public Works and Transportation on March 5th.
So refer this to same committee, Public Works and Transportation.
So can we accept it and place it on file?
We
and
can.
Refer?
We can. It'd be more appropriate to accept, place on file.
Motion so made?
Motion to accept and place on file. And you want to refer it, you said, Councilor?
Send a copy.
Copy.
Send a copy to the committee. Has been made by Councilor Kilby, seconded
Second.
by Councilor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Every number of amendments from the Traffic Commission.
Motion to refer to ordinance?
Motion to refer to ordinance has been made by Councilor Kilby, seconded by Councilor Pelletier. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
We have the purchasing agent declaring surplus property. It's a 1987 Ford pumper truck that she has declared surplus.
Motion to adopt, place on file?
Motion to approve and adopt and place on file has been made by Councilor Kilby, seconded by
Second.
Councilor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
We have a communication from the city planner and a zoning amendment for the wind energy corridor.
It would be appropriate.
Motion to refer to planning?
Motion to refer to planning has been made by
Second.
Councilor Kadim, seconded by Councilor Kilby. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in, Councilor in seat 3, Councilor Kamara?
Question, isn't the city planner sending this to us?
Planning board.
We have to refer this to the planning board. Planning board.
Okay.
It needs to go before planning, before it comes before the council, and I believe that we need a public hearing on that, Madam Clerk, correct?
Correct.
There we go. Start for the day for me. Anything further,
I yield.
Councilor? Thank you. Motion to refer to the planning board has been made by Councilor Kadim, seconded by Councilor Kilby. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
I have an additional communication from the city planner to amend the zoning bylaws that relate to kennel licenses.
Motion to refer to planning board for a public hearing.
Motion to refer to public
Second.
planning board has been made by Councilor Kadim, seconded by Councilor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
I have a miscellaneous traffic for second reading and enrollment as amended.
Motion to adopt is amended?
Motion to adopt second reading and enrollment as amended has been made by Councilor Kilby,
Second.
seconded by Councilor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Whereas political retaliation continues by the current mayor at an alarming rate, and whereas by his own admission, the latest act of revenge politics was unjustly leveled against School Committee Vice Chair Mark Costa and School Committeeman Paul Coogan by the mayor's removing them from the Durfee Building Oversight Committee. And whereas the mayor is the sole appointee to many boards and committees, now therefore be it resolved that the City Council Committee on Ordinances and Legislation convene to discuss and adopt by emergency preamble that any appointments or removals to boards and committees which have policy-making or fiduciary responsibilities now require a ratification vote of the City Council to ensure fair and just actions are being taken.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt has been made by Councilor Kilby,
Second.
seconded by Councilor Pelletier. Discussion, Councilor in seat one of the sponsors of the resolution, Councilor Kadim.
Thank you, Mr. President. Vice President LeBeau was really the lead on this, but I think the resolution itself is pretty straightforward. I'm going to ask my colleagues to support it and let the ordinance committee vet this out. I think it's significantly important to make sure that any of our boards, especially the boards that are just policy-making boards and boards that have fiduciary responsibility, we have a check and balance in terms of those that are appointed and/or removed from those boards. The Durfee Building Committee is a fiduciary committee. That building committee oversees and approves all invoices that go through with the Durfee project itself. So I just want to make sure, as one council, that we do have the oversight on that stuff. Thank you.
Yield?
Yes.
Hearing none. Any further questions, comments, concerns? Councilor in seat three, Councilor Kamara.
Well, I was just going quickly through the charter, and the charter does reference the authority of the mayor to make appointments, and it does also addresses the issue of the council's role in the process of making those appointments. Also, I think the premise, this alarming rate, I'm not sure where this alarming rate is, and I certainly think that the most controversial thing of an incumbent school committee member being relegated to an advisory position is maybe bad optics, but I don't think it rises to the occasion of dramatically attempting to change. But I have no problem with the ordinance committee considering the issue, and I'll support it because it's going to ordinance committee, but I do think that the basis of it is not really sound. I yield.
Anything further?
No.
Hearing none. There's a motion to adopt that has been made by Councilor Kilby, seconded by Councilor Pelletier. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Whereas the city charter adopted by the voters of Fall River at the November 7th, 2017 city election provided a recall process to remove elected officials, Section 8-5 recall. And whereas the recall process has proven itself to be controversial and may not be a fair means either to remove an existing office holder from a duly elected position achieved at a city preliminary and final election, or a fair means to replace a recalled office holder, and whereas the Fall River City Council has established a Fall River Task Force which is reviewing a possible amendment to the city charter to consider proposals establishing a city manager, city council form of government to replace Fall River's current form of government. And whereas this Fall River Task Force, in reviewing the charter to make it more effective in accomplishing its objectives and goals through a better form of government, is also considering how a city manager, city council might be more effective in carrying out the governing of Fall River. Now therefore be it resolved that the city council does direct the Fall River Task Force to expand its scope of review by examining the recall process to determine if there is a better way to address the citizens' right to remove an office holder from public office, while at the same time assuring the rights of both the elected office holder as well as the rights of citizens of Fall River. And be it further resolved that the Fall River Task Force report its findings and its recommendations to the City Council for its review and action.
Move adoption of the resolution.
Motion to adopt has been made by Councilor Stephen Kamara, seconded by Councilor Long. Discussion. Councilor in seat three, the sponsor of the resolution, Councilor Kamara.
I realize that there are many ways for us to take a look at this recall, and I'm not looking for the task force to go much beyond the scope that it currently has. because I think the scope that it currently has is most important. But in the process of my doing research, I found that there are many, in fact, I spoke to the executive director of the Mass Municipal Association, and he said that not only should we look at communities that are city manager forms of government, we'll look at communities throughout Massachusetts, many of which do not have a recall process. I'm not sure that we should go there. I think the people of Fall River deserve the right to recall their elected officials if they so choose. But I do think that clearly, the system we have now is bad. And most people, I think, on both sides, both those that have, he that won, as well as those that lost, feel that there's something wrong with this system. So, again, not that I'm looking for more work for the task force, but it is a great group of people. We've only met twice. We are going to meet on Wednesday at 4 p.m. with some experts from Mass Municipal Association. But I do hope that my colleagues will support this and give the task force this expanded responsibility. With that, I yield.
Thank you. I just want to point out, I'm not going to be supporting this resolution at this time. I think this task force, which was a task force approved by the city council, and the individuals were appointed by myself with the workings of my colleague in seat 3. I think this task force has enough to do and enough research to do. In addition to that, we have a charter review that is going to be happening in some 2 or 3 years. If there's an issue with respect to how the charter is written, it could be discussed then. In addition to that, all the councils received a 10 taxpayer lawsuit today with respect to the results of the election and that process, which will be litigated in court, I assume, at some point. So the point of the task force initially was for this task force to work with the appointments of the task force to discuss whether or not they want a city manager. And I think at this point, this is just expanding its needs for this task force at this time, and it's not something I think we should be getting involved in at this point, and I will not be supporting this. Anything further for discussion? Councilor in seat 3, Councilor McMara.
Well, I do appreciate your perspective, Mr. President, and I just want to underscore that the task force does not have any authority to move anything forward. It only has responsibility to then make recommendation back to the council. So the council will then decide whether or not any recommendation that might be forthcoming from the task force might be then enacted either through ordinance or through legislation. So this is just to give another bit of input from a study committee on an issue that I think is of most concern to many people, and I think this provides that opportunity.
Appreciate it, Councilor. Anything further? Hearing none, there's a motion to adopt that has been made and seconded. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
On the motion to adopt the resolution, Councilors Kadim?
No.
Stephen,
Yes.
Excuse me, Joseph Kamara. Stephen Kamara?
Yes?
Kilby?
Yes.
Lullaby LeBeau? Long?
No.
Pelletier?
Yes.
Viveras?
Yes.
President Ponti?
No. Motion carry?
4 yeas, 3 nays.
4 yeas, 3 nays. Motion carries. Does the motion carry?
No, it only received 4 yeas.
4 yeas, 3 nays. You needed 5, correct?
Correct.
Where is that? I thought we operate under majority unless otherwise directed.
Nope.
Required 5.
Motion fails.
Madam Clerk,
Required
Wait.
5
where is that?
in the charter.
I'm sorry.
She said
Charter.
in the charter.
Okay. Do you know the section?
Off the top of my head, no, but I can get back.
I can't
Off
hear.
the top of my head, no, but I can get back to you with the
Trustee,
section.
I trust the clerk's opinion, I just ask we move the agenda, please.
Next item on the agenda, Madam Clerk.
I'll move acceptance based upon the suggestion. If the charter does not address it, then I would ask us to review it. Thank you.
Mr. President, through you, can we just have either the clerk or the assistant clerk just go through it as we go through the meeting? And we can just take this issue back up at the last
Yeah,
item?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Next order of business.
We have the auto repair shop license applications. for 830 Globe Street and 292 William S. Canning Boulevard.
Motion to
These are
adopt.
renewals.
Second.
Motion to adopt has been made by Counselor Kadim, seconded by Counselor Kilby. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Item 11 is a request to transfer an auto repair shop license located at 851 Globe Street from Philip DeDuca to Christopher Pinault, doing business as MP's Auto Repair.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt has been made by Counselor Kadim, seconded by Counselor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
We have the police chief's report on licenses.
Motion to adopt.
Motion to adopt has been made by Counselor Kilby, seconded
Second.
by Counselor Kadim. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
We have a number of claims.
Refer to Corporation Council.
Second.
Madam Clerk, did you include the second-hand licenses in that last bit?
Yes, they're all included in the
So-
chief's list.
Okay, very good. Motion to refer to Corporation Council for the claims has been made by Counselor Kilby, Counselor Kadim, seconded by Counselor Kilby. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Have a request from a
licenses?
city resident to purchase a parcel of city-owned land.
Refer to Real Estate Committee.
Motion to refer to the Real Estate Committee has been made by Counselor Kadim,
Second.
seconded by Counselor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
You have minutes of the city council's February 15th meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes. Place on
Motion to
file.
approve the minutes has been made by Counselor Kilby, seconded by Counselor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Have a citation.
Accept and place on file.
Motion to adopt the
Oh, I'm sorry,
citation
adopt.
has been made by Counselor Kadim, seconded by Counselor Stephen Kamara. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. We're going to take a brief recess for signatures on ordinances, as well as get that clarifying point on that item. We are in recess. Council is now back in order. With respect to the clarification item that we had on Councilor C3's resolution, city charter says, under exercise of powers, quorum, and rules, the presence of 5 city councilors shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business, except as otherwise provided by the general laws or by this charter. The affirmative vote taken by a roll call of 5 city councilors shall be required to adopt any ordinance. As a result of that, it's my opinion that the motion has failed. Motion, count, we have a couple of things just to read. Hold on one second. Counselor in C7, Counselor Pelletier?
Yeah, Mr. President, I'd like to reconsider number 11, the transfer of for motor sales. That was in committee, and we had the owner of the property come down, and we tabled it because we wanted to see who was gonna run it, and it's back in front of us, so we still don't know who's gonna run it, so we'd like to send it
Are
to
you
committee.
talking about item 11 with respect to 94?
Yes.
The auto shop license number
Yeah.
94 from Philip De Duca, DBA 851 Motor Sales to Christopher Pinault.
This is a transfer, Counselor, to a new
Where are they gonna
operator.
operate?
I'm sorry? 851 Globe Street.
Well, that's the one we had a problem with.
Oh.
The
This should-
owner had come down, and we asked for, the guy who was gonna run the shop be present. He never come down. Some of the neighbors had a concern of the individual, so I don't know if it's the same guy. So
You want to
we'd like
make a motion to
Second.
reconsider?
Second.
Motion to reconsider has been made by Counselor Pelletier, seconded by Counselor Kilby. Discussion on the motion to reconsider? Hearing none. Do we need a roll call vote on that, Madam Clerk?
No.
Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Mo-
Motion to take item number 11 and refer to,
Regulations?
motion to refer to the Regulations Committee has been made by Counselor Pelletier, seconded by Counselor Kadim. Discussion on the referral? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
And lastly, Mr. President, we have the miscellaneous traffic for a final ordination,
Motion to pass through.
as amended.
Final,
What's the motion, Counselor?
motion to vote.
Motion to pass through all readings as amended has been made by Counselor Stephen Kamara, seconded by Counselor Long. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Vote to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn has been made by Counselor Stephen Kamara, seconded by Counselor Kilby. All those in favor? Opposed? The ayes have it. Good night. Thank you.